Welcome to the Rutgers University Newark SPAA Writing Method Series. This session is going to discuss expanding your analysis. Public administration is studied as a social science, and research is a process. Theoretical evidence serves as an academic foundation for more research. We seek objective empirical evidence by using the scientific method. Students learn the research process through their core courses within our curriculum. Students will be taking, amongst other courses, Introduction to Public Administration, Managing Public Organizations, Technology in Public Administration, Administrative Ethics, Research Design, Analytical Methods, and they'll also be creating their capstone or e-portfolio at the end of the program. There's different types of research that you can do, and the introduction begins as soon as you begin reading public administration materials in peer-reviewed articles and essays. Also public administration textbooks, as well as all information concerning public service that is written about in publications, whether they be newspapers or academic journals. When developing your work, context is everything. And so we have to ask certain questions for any paper that we're writing. What's the primary argument or thesis of the paper? What specific issues are being addressed by the paper? Who is the target audience of the work? What's the primary purpose of the text? Is it to inform the reader, maybe persuade them of a course of action, or is it to entertain, keep them interested? Which resources are actually the best for illustrating points? And what types of details will best illustrate the point of your paper? So these might come in the form of various ideas or theories, particular important facts and details, or specific numbers, whether they be financial in nature, or perhaps polling data or another form of data. We always have to ask what's first been written about the topic. And for this, we use online and offline data sources. We cast a broad net, identifying specific issues that deal with our research question, and then identifying surrounding issues that might also be important. Further, we want to narrow our search down to the specifics about the topic. In public administration, the more specific we can be concerning our target audience or the policy at hand or the activities taking place, the more that we'll be able to write about. We seek to use primary sources, but secondary sources are also okay. If we have secondary sources, we want to follow the trail of breadcrumbs so that we can identify where the information originally came from. If we're not quite sure where the information came from, then we can identify what are the authorities that we can trust that can provide us with accurate information, oftentimes cross-referencing those materials. And when you're cross-referencing sources, the first place to look when you're doing research for public administration is typically the organizations and institutions involved in the topic. Beyond that, we move into government websites, whether they be federal, state, or local. Online news sources can be good, but when you're dealing with different newspapers or different media corporations, just make sure to cross-reference your materials because the news has a couple of elements to it to pay attention to. There's a time frame issue, making sure that the information that is breaking or the information that is shared is consistent throughout organizations. And also, there's going to be, as current events develop, more information that comes to light. So it's always important to keep track of the dates and keep track of the overarching narratives that are being played in these particular types of online sources. Academic journals are strong sources of information, public administration-based journals especially, and so they should always be used and consulted whenever possible. They will oftentimes have peer-reviewed articles or essays in them, and you can find different peer-reviewed articles and essays in academic research. This is largely information that you'll find in Rutgers Library, Google Scholar, and other types of resources that feature peer-reviewed articles and essays. Watchdog groups are also very good sources of information. These are groups such as the Better Business Bureau, such as GuideStar, organizations that take a look at the regulation of the industry itself and can give objective information to parties interested. Public administration focuses on evidence-based research, and that comes in multiple forms. for public administration students to utilize. While there are experimental randomized controlled trials, these are overseen by the Institutional Review Board. They need IRB approval. And there's also full systematic reviews. Public administration students will oftentimes find information not just in the quantitative space, but also through meta-analyses of multiple studies. These can be quantitative or qualitative. Quasi-experimental studies, that is studies that follow the experimental design but are not randomized. Non-experimental observation-based studies, as well as numerous types of qualitative studies. These can come from respected authorities, respected boards, or respected policy makers. They can come in the form of literature reviews and peer-reviewed articles and essays, different types of quality improvement studies or program evaluation studies, same with financial evaluation studies, and numerous case studies and reports are oftentimes used in peer-reviewed articles and essays that can be submitted as evidence. There's numerous methods to review data, but primarily we focus on the scientific method. This process is well known in the hard sciences, but also is used in social science because of its common benefits. Ideally, students should seek to understand the process on an intuitive level, understanding that what they must first do is observe the issue that they're interested in. They'll need to hypothesize and then take the subjects that they're interested in and compare them to each other, measuring consistency of their variables over time. They'll need to identify the outliers that can provide extra insight into what's going on, while also addressing other external factors from the environment. And once they've done this type of work, they can review their hypotheses, seeing if their research has borne fruit. Regardless, they'll create recommendations for the next step moving forward. This is an example of what that may look like from a student's perspective when putting together your standard capstone project or your standard research study. Begin with a research question, followed by a literature review that is reviewing research, creating a theoretical model that is the research is going to follow, and then establishing a research methodology, something that allows us to see a step-by-step process of how the research will be performed. Methods for collecting the data will need to be reviewed, and once all of that information is gathered, the experiment is performed and the student can present their findings. Once those findings are presented, they can then go back and determine the relationships that were established during the research design process, from the answering the hypotheses to asking new questions that may influence the next study. When presenting data, there is a lot of information that can't truly be synthesized in a half-an-hour presentation. Therefore, it's best to have guiding points and then focus on the work specifically. It is very important that students understand that they have access to their professors, the Writing Center itself, and numerous resources that can aid in the various ways to help present their data. So, with that being said, it's best for students to decide what is the best format to present their information. Should it be in the form of a written document, maybe a PowerPoint presentation, or an oral presentation? Once the information is provided, we have to ask the question, what are the key terms and units of measurement? If it, for example, is a budget that the student is putting together, then it will be important to understand what key financial terms are going to be used in the work, as well as which units are going to be developed. If the information is all in US dollars, but it's important to also consider other forms of currency, such as British pounds, then the student's going to want to introduce the reader to that concept and also potentially make the conversions in the paper itself for ease of reading. It's also helpful for students to use comparative data from the literature review. This is where meta-analysis comes in. Students will be able to see what other researchers have already done, questions that have been asked. Where is there a consensus by the researchers that are being studied? Where is there disagreement? And is the student able to identify different elements of that research that will help them in their own work? This usually will take place in the form of what's been previously discussed already, but with a bit more detail here, such as identifying specific data collection methods, sample sizes, variables, environmental contexts, as well as anomalies and the reliability and validity of these studies. Uh, this is something that is covered in research design extensively, and so examples can be given in the context of a student's work, but at the same time, this is not to be read as a full overview of what is a very large process. Students will ultimately place formulas from their statistical analyses directly into the study, as well as place the data readouts into the text as is required by the work, as well as placing any sort of supplementary data into the appendix that is blank documents that will where individual audience members can focus on gathering specific details from the text and how it was originally created. These data sets may come in the form of lists, budgets, tables, charts, and graphs. Students should analyze the meaning of the key data points as they see fit for the appropriate work. Students should also, once this information is completed, identify policy solutions and potential alternatives to the policies that they may be studying. Choices include do nothing to the policy, it's fine. Allocate resources directly to the policy differently, or change the way that those resources are allocated. Should we allocate resources to secondary aspects of the policy, or outsource services to other organizations as a solution? There's numerous ways to approach data once it has been compiled. We would put that back within the context of the original project, back into our research question. So as new questions appear, we want ideally for new solutions to be met with more questions leading into a thorough research process. This is an example of a citation for tables, charts, and graphs. Students should recognize here that this table example can be placed directly into a paper. It requires that the table be numbered, that the table be given a title, and that the data be clear. Once that is described, then at the bottom of this table, where it says reprinted from article title, this is the appropriate citation for citing tables, charts, and graphs from other sources. The purpose of quoting material is actually to support your ideas. While it's important to accurately explain the author's intent, you want to present the analysis of what the author has to say in the context of what you are arguing. So while we previously were discussing what quantitative information looks like, this is an series of examples that talk about qualitative information. When using the quotes, we want to do it from the perspective of authorities that will allow us to either support or refute the arguments that our text is attempting to wrestle with. We want to document the text that we're quoting as accurately as possible. And we want to use descriptive details to make sure that we analyze what's important about the quote. For us as researchers, it's always important to ask journalistic questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. How many, how often, how much. These are important questions oftentimes because the information provided in the quote may indeed be straightforward, but the question that has to be asked is, why is the quote in the paper at all? In this case, the quote giving a direction will allow the reader to understand how the author intends for the quote to be analyzed. There's different reasons to use quotes, including distinct language that is captured well by the original source, difficult to paraphrase ideas because the information being provided is very specific. The source is important to the topic, and so who is saying it is as important as what is being said. And the words that are being said are open to interpretation. So it's important sometimes to identify and examine information that can be interpreted in multiple ways in light of the research being done in order to clarify and discuss further what needs to be argued. It's important to remember when analyzing quotes to keep a strong voice. This is done through strong topic sentences, putting the core ideas of a paragraph into your own words can be incredibly powerful and give the paper both direction and a strong sense of flow. It's important not to allow the author's words to speak for you, but to have the author's words support your overall message. The author's words can be utilized very well to gain new meaning from the passage. So in the next series of slides, this is going to be a discussion of how to identify some of that information by circling keywords, underlining key phrases, examining their separate meanings, and then using that understanding to further critique the source. Also, everyone should remember that one of the most powerful tools they have in APA format is the ability to paraphrase information. Putting information into your own words can be a really powerful way of developing a strong narrative and a sense of cohesion for your reader. In this example, there is an article from the New York Times, and the article was focused on why it's so difficult to understand large numbers when it comes to financial data. They read that a 2007 New York Times article discussed the difficulty of comprehending large figures, such as $1.2 trillion that had been spent at the time on the war in Iraq. In order to better understand the figure, the reporter explained the same amount of money and what it could buy in several key areas. First, the author took that number of 1.2 trillion and broke it into the amount of money that was spent per day. It had equaled $300 million on a daily basis. This was spent on military vehicles, fuel needed to run those vehicles, combat pay for enlisted troops, the salaries of reservists and contractors, as well as rebuilding the country. But in order to establish the point and bring it home, the author then compared that same amount of money to what that could do domestically. A public health campaign of over 10 years could double cancer research funding. There could be treatment for every American whose diabetes or heart disease is now going unmanaged. A global immunization campaign could save millions of children's lives. Poverty and education could be a focus. Universal pre-K for all children 3 and 4 years old. A significant increase to reconstruction costs for Hurricane Katrina at the time. As well as for those interested in a more national security-based approach, the author of the article then focused on recommendations to improve national security, such as recommendations for the 9/11, but the 9/11 Commission had not yet put in place, better baggage and cargo screening, stronger measures against nuclear proliferation, financing for the war in Afghanistan at the time, and peacekeeping forces to stop genocide in Darfur. These were all concrete ways that the author could communicate with the audience the scale of what was taking place on an international level. As a student, you can often reframe the concepts that you're interested in, whether they be from a contemporary or a historical context, in such a way that it provides your reader with a greater understanding of where you're coming from and why it's significant. Another type of quote that people use often when it's not just concrete information that's coming in the form of hard data are quotes that have an inspirational quality to them, such as quotes that are used in speeches. One of the most famous is by President Kennedy during his inaugural address. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. One may say that this is a really powerful quote, but there's not much that you can actually do with it because there's so much abstract thought here. But there's actually more that can be done here if we take a look at what the quote both literally means and what it figuratively is meant to signify. The quote literally can be broken down into two pieces. What does a country do for its citizens? It provides protection, develops infrastructure, as well as provides services for the country. What can citizens do for their country? Well, they can pay taxes, they can volunteer, they can expand the economy by becoming entrepreneurs. Well, what does the quote figuratively mean then? Well, the quote is a call to public service, and its historical context was a call to volunteer. And they wanted this, that the federal government's goal was to establish a population that was more engaged. Many people joined the Peace Corps, many others joined the military. And if we were to apply the same quote today, we can see that there's numerous ways to be involved in public service. And so if we were to take a look at different public service options in 2021, we may find that there's a steady through line. Some people may point to the Peace Corps still or AmeriCorps. Other people may point to other ways that they could be active or engaged in the military. We find that there's more that can be said for a quote like this. And so what we do is make sure to, of course, take a look at what common themes from our courses may be utilized if we wanted to put something like this into the paper. And then we reframe the quote. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It can be reframed in an analytical stance by saying that citizens should use their talents and skills to be the change that they wish to see in society. People can choose to serve their country in many ways. And from here, you, the writer, would be able to identify the key elements that the paper is about. Is this about public service and why we should increase funding? Is it about the importance of local or community organizations? Is it about the importance of volunteering? You can choose from there, but remember that your role is to identify both what does the quote that you're analyzing literally mean, and then what does it figuratively signify, and figure out, is there more that you want to say to your reader? A couple of small notes about staying organized throughout your work. When you're doing your research, be consistent with with key terms and also be specific when you're detailing information. If you're gathering information from a particular time frame, perhaps you are looking for demographic information from the US Census, and you're going to use the information from 2010, and you also want to use the information from 2020. That's perfectly fine, but you want to make sure that whatever you are looking at that's comparable to it is also within those same time frames. This is also true on scales. If you are talking about local government, then you may not want to compare local government to the federal government unless you are establishing a relationship there. You also might want to look at different states of different sizes, depending on how you are actually organizing and comparing information. This is very much apples to apples, but pay attention to what your authors that you're reviewing are doing, to pay attention to how they are presenting information and examples that they are giving, because we all have the same job here. And the idea is that if they're telling you something in their work, which is designed to be lean and efficient, there's probably a good reason why that information is being presented as it is. We also want to ensure that there's consistency when laying out the information throughout the work. So if you are using numbers such as the number 5 or numbers such as numbers in the thousands or in the millions, be consistent with how you present it. You do not have to spell out the words if you are going to also be using the numbers themselves. Either is fine, but be consistent so as not to confuse your reader. Also, as mentioned previously, please convert numbers into a single format if multiple types of systems are being used. If the empirical system and the metric system are both being used at the same time, then it would make a lot of sense to identify which one you want to place the information in. And always try to present the information in ways that are digestible to your reader. So if you have a lot of information that you need to put in that is filled with numbers and dates and a lot of moving parts, moving in different directions, consider putting the information into a table, chart, or graph. APA format allows you to do that. And if you have any questions about the best way to present that information, then please make an appointment with the Writing Center and we can review ways that you can use APA to your advantage in this way. You should also pay attention to, once your work is coming together, this is not something that you wait necessarily until the end, but it's also something that you may not necessarily establish in the beginning. Your work may have a creative bent. that allows you to stay thematically consistent or allows you to keep the reader's attention in ways that are interesting. So be creative in the application of the material you quote. Make sure to develop a narrative throughout the work if one is present. Uh, and ask yourself when you're grabbing information, what's surprising about the information that's being critiqued? How can you best pique the reader's interest? Ask whether or not the information is relevant to current events, and if so, how? Ask what's shocking about the information or what's inspiring about the information. Odds are, if it jumped out to you, it will also jump out to your reader. Remember that you do not need quotes and data in most research when it comes to the introductions and conclusions, because those are designed to set up the research as what and introduce what's important, as well as conclude the research. We want to keep the primary thesis or argument in the body as much as possible. And if you want to make sure that your paper is flowing well, read the topic sentences to ensure that there's flow and consistency between them. Also, make sure that you don't overuse quotes. This is a game of proportion. So if more than 25% of your paper is quoted, then you may have too many. If you have the length available in the paper still, you have a couple of pages that are there to go, feel free to add more of your voice to the paper so that it's more proportionate with the quote. If you bring in 4 lines, then provide 4 lines of analysis perhaps. Or if you do not have the space, feel free to cut down on the quotes and just focus on the most powerful and selected interests that the quotes present. And make sure that you don't plagiarize. If you have any questions, please see the previous session on strong citations and avoiding plagiarism, or make an appointment with the Writing Center. I would love to talk to you about it. Please remember, finally, that facts matter. We build on a solid foundation of evidence-based research in public administration. We keep the integrity of that information by making sure that we are citing properly and analyzing information with integrity. Also, we want to make sure that how we apply that information is done responsibly and done with a certain amount of insight. The continued evaluation of these types of facts of this process are the foundations of journalism, science, and higher education. So when you are doing your work, please remember that we all have the same job and we're building upon a body of work together. My name is Terry Hall. I'm the director of SPAA's Graduate Writing Center. If you have any questions for me, I'd love to take them. Time.